I don't want to be by myself anymore. I used to pride myself on being independent. I wore my solitude like armor, convincing myself it was my choice, my strength. For years, I built a life that looked fulfilling from the outside: steady job, hobbies I enjoyed, and a small, but loyal circle of friends. But somewhere along the way, cracks began to form in that facade. Now, it feels like those cracks are splitting me wide open, and all I can think is, I don't want to be by myself anymore. It hit me hardest during a random Tuesday evening. I had come home from work, exhausted as usual, and collapsed onto the couch. My dinner sat untouched on the coffee table, yet another frozen meal reheated in the microwave. The hum of the television filled the silence in the room, but it wasn't enough to drown out the echo of my own loneliness. I stared at the empty chair across from me, imagining what it would be like to have someone sitting there, sharing the small, mundane moments of life. It wasn't the first time I felt this way, but it was the first time it consumed me so completely. Every little thing seemed to remind me of what I didn't have. The sound of my neighbor laughing with her partner through the thin walls, the couple holding hands at the grocery store, the group of friends taking selfies at the park, it all felt like tiny knives, cutting into the parts of me I'd tried to keep hidden. I told myself I was fine, but the truth is, I'm not. I haven't been for a long time. I began to wonder how I ended up here. Was it my fault? Had I pushed people away without realizing it? Or was it just bad luck, a cruel twist of fate that left me stranded on this lonely island? My mind spiraled as I replayed every failed relationship, every friendship that faded, every opportunity I let slip through my fingers. The weight of regret settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and suffocating. On weekends, when the world outside buzzed with life and activity, I found myself retreating further into my shell. I couldn't bear the thought of facing crowds, where everyone seemed so connected, so happy, while I felt like a ghost drifting through their midst. I tried to distract myself binge-watching shows, scrolling endlessly on my phone, picking up hobbies I thought might spark some joy. But nothing worked. The emptiness followed me everywhere, a shadow I couldn't escape. I started questioning if there was something inherently wrong with me. Why was it so easy for others to find love, companionship, a sense of belonging? What was it about me that made me so hard to love? I hated the insecurity that crept into my thoughts, but I couldn't push it away. It was like a constant whisper in the back of my mind, reminding me of my failures, my flaws, my inadequacies. One particularly bad night, I tried to convince myself that being alone wasn't so bad. I made a list of all the benefits: freedom, independence, no one to answer to. But the words felt hollow, like lies I was telling myself to survive. Deep down, I didn't want freedom. I wanted connection. I wanted someone to share my life with, to come home to laugh with, to hold when the nights felt too long and the world felt too heavy. I tried to reach out, to open myself up to the possibility of connection. I joined dating apps, went to social events, and even reconnected with old friends. But every attempt felt forced and natural. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trying too hard, that my desperation was seeping through and driving people away. The rejection stung, each one adding another layer to the armor I had tried so hard to shed. Despite everything, there's a small part of me that refuses to give up. It's the part that believes things can get better, that I can find the connection I'm so desperate for if I keep trying. It's not a loud voice most days, it's barely a whisper, but it's there, keeping me going when all I want to do is give up. I've started to realize that maybe the first step isn't about finding someone else, it's about finding myself. As much as I don't want to be alone, maybe I need to learn how to be okay with it before I can truly connect with anyone else. It's not an easy realization, and it feels like an uphill battle. But if there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that loneliness doesn't define me. It's just a part of my story, not the whole of it. So, I keep going. Some days are harder than others, and the longing still sits heavy in my chest. But I hold on to the hope that one day, I'll find the connection I'm searching for, not because I need someone to complete me, but because I'll be ready to share my life with someone who truly understands me. Until then, I'll keep trying to find peace in the quiet moments and strength in the solitude, even when it feels impossible. I started trying to reframe my life, to see the solitude as something I could use instead of something that used me. It's not easy, it's never easy, but I've made some small changes. I wake up a little earlier and sit with my thoughts instead of scrolling on my phone. I've picked up journaling, even if most days it's just a mess of tangled feelings poured onto the page. It helps, though, to see the words in black and white. It makes the chaos in my mind feel more manageable, less overwhelming. There are moments when I feel a glimmer of hope, like when I go for a walk in the park and the crisp air feels refreshing instead of isolating. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at something small, a bird chirping, the way the light filters through the trees. These moments don't erase the loneliness, but they remind me that there's still beauty to be found, even in the midst of all this. I've also started therapy, which feels like admitting defeat in some ways but like a lifeline in others. Sitting across from someone who doesn't judge me, who lets me say the things I'm too afraid to tell anyone else, has been a strange kind of relief. I've begun to untangle the roots of my feelings, exploring where the loneliness comes from and why it feels so all-consuming. My therapist reminds me that it's okay to feel this way, that loneliness is a universal human experience, even if it feels uniquely mine. One of the hardest things I've had to face is the realization that I've placed so much of my happiness on external validation. I thought that having someone in my life, a partner, a best friend, anyone would fix everything. But now, I'm beginning to understand that no one else can fill the void inside me. That's something I have to do for myself. It's a painful truth, but it's also liberating in a way. It means that I have the power to change things, even if it's going to take time. I've started setting small goals for myself, little ways to connect with the world again. I joined a local book club, which was terrifying at first, but I'm beginning to find my footing. I signed up for a painting class, even though I'm terrible at it, just to have a creative outlet. These small steps don't feel like monumental changes, but they're enough to remind me that I'm capable of trying, of putting myself out there, even when it feels uncomfortable. Of course, there are still bad days when I come home and the silence feels deafening, when I can't shake the thought that I'll always be alone. On those days, I let myself feel the sadness without judging it. I cry if I need to, or curl up with a blanket and watch a movie that makes me laugh, even if it's just a temporary distraction. I'm learning that it's okay to have bad days, as long as I don't let them define me. Slowly, I'm starting to see that being alone doesn't have to mean being lonely. It's a lesson I'm still learning, one that I have to remind myself of constantly. But each time I take a step forward, no matter how small, I feel a little stronger. I feel a little more hopeful that this chapter of my life, as difficult as it is, will lead to something better. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll find the connection I'm searching for, or maybe I'll learn to be content on my own. Either way, I know that I'm doing the work, and that's enough for now. I'm learning to sit with the discomfort, to face my fears instead of running from them. And in doing so, I'm finding pieces of myself that I didn't even know were missing. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm moving towards something instead of just waiting for life to happen. It's not easy, and it's not always pretty, but it's real, and maybe that's enough. As time goes on, I begin to notice small changes within myself, changes that are subtle but feel monumental in the quiet moments of reflection. The way I carry myself feels different. I'm no longer as hunched over by the weight of my loneliness. My shoulders feel lighter, and I catch myself standing taller. The thoughts that once drowned me, those relentless what-ifs and why-nots, no longer have the same hold. They're still there, of course, whispering at the edges of my mind, but their voices are weaker now, easier to ignore. I start to embrace the idea that my worth isn't defined by whether someone chooses me. For so long, I believed that being loved was proof of being lovable, and being chosen was proof of being enough. It's not an easy belief to unlearn, but with each day, I chip away at it. I remind myself that my value isn't conditional on someone else's opinion or affection. It's an uphill battle, but I'm fighting it, step by step. The people around me, the ones I've overlooked in my desperation for romantic love, start to become clearer in my life. My friends, my family, they've been there all along, offering love in their own ways. I hadn't appreciated it before, too fixated on what I didn't have to see what I did. I make more of an effort to nurture those relationships, to show up for the people who've always shown up for me. I stop taking them for granted, and in doing so, I start to feel more connected, less alone. Some days, I feel strong enough to venture into the world with new confidence. I smile at strangers on the street, strike up conversations with coworkers I'd previously only nodded at, and say yes to invitations I'd once declined out of fear. It's terrifying, but it's also exhilarating. Each small interaction feels like a victory, a step closer to the person I want to become. But there are still setbacks, days when the loneliness creeps back in like an uninvited guest, settling into the cracks of my heart. On those days, I remind myself that healing isn't linear. I let myself feel the sadness, but I don't let it consume me. I try to be kind to myself, to speak to myself the way I would to a dear friend. It's not easy, I'm my own harshest critic, but I'm trying. Through all of this, I begin to explore what it means to truly enjoy my own company. I pick up hobbies I'd abandoned long ago, like writing and photography, and I lose myself in them. I take myself on dates, coffee shops, art galleries, quiet walks in the park, and I start to find joy in those moments of solitude. It feels strange at first, like I'm pretending to be okay, but over time, it starts to feel real. I'm not just filling the silence, I'm finding peace in it. One day, as I sit in a cafe with my journal, sipping on a latte and watching the world go by, I realize something profound. I'm not just surviving anymore, I'm living. It's not the life I once imagined for myself, but it's mine, and it's enough. I don't need someone else to complete me, I'm whole on my own. The longing for connection is still there, of course. I still want to love and be loved, to share my life with someone who sees me for who I am and embraces it. But that longing no longer feels like a gaping void. It's a quiet hope, not a desperate plea. And I know that if it happens, it'll be a beautiful addition to my life, not the thing that saves me. For now, I'm content to keep growing, to keep discovering who I am and what I'm capable of. The journey isn't over, and I know there will be more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm walking towards something instead of away from it. And that feels like enough. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed a quiet but powerful transformation taking root within me. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, there were no sweeping epiphanies or life-altering moments. Instead, it was like watching the seasons change, gradual, subtle, and almost imperceptible at first. I found myself savoring the small wins, the moments when I felt at peace in my own skin. I started journaling about gratitude, even when it felt forced. It began with small things, the warmth of the sun on my face during a morning walk, the satisfying crunch of leaves underfoot, or the smile of the barista who remembered my usual order. Over time, this practice rewired my perspective. The world, once so bleak and suffocating, began to reveal its hidden beauty. It wasn't perfect, life rarely is, but it felt more manageable, more vibrant. I also began focusing on my health, both physical and mental. Exercise became my outlet, not because I wanted to change how I looked, but because it made me feel strong and alive. I tried yoga for the first time, and while I struggled to hold the poses, I found an unexpected sense of calm in the process. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone of my journey. My therapist helped me untangle the intricate web of self-doubt, fear, and shame that had held me back for so long. It was painful work, but it was also liberating. Slowly, I started building a life that felt fuller and more meaningful. I began volunteering at a local shelter on weekends, helping organize meals and chatting with the people who came through the doors. It gave me a sense of purpose, a reminder that I could make a difference in someone else's life, even in the smallest of ways. The connections I made there, however fleeting, helped fill some of the void I'd been carrying. Socially, I pushed myself to say yes more often, even when my initial instinct was to decline. I went to trivia nights, joined a book club, and even attended a pottery class. At first, I felt out of place, like everyone else had their lives figured out while I was still piecing mine together. But as I got to know people, I realized that everyone was navigating their own struggles, their own uncertainties. This realization was both humbling and comforting. It reminded me that I wasn't alone in my imperfections. As for the longing for a romantic partner, it didn't disappear, but it became less of an ache and more of a quiet hope. I stopped obsessively swiping through dating apps, trying to force connections that weren't meant to be. Instead, I decided to focus on building a life that I loved, trusting that if the right person came along, they would be a part of it, not the entirety of it. This shift in mindset was freeing in a way I hadn't anticipated. It allowed me to stop waiting for someone else to make my life worthwhile and to start finding joy in the life I was already living. There were still hard days, of course, nights when the loneliness crept in, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and wondering if I was destined to always feel this way. On those nights, I leaned into my coping mechanisms, writing, meditating, reaching out to a friend. I reminded myself that feelings are temporary, that even the heaviest emotions eventually pass, and they did. Eventually, I started noticing a deeper sense of self-acceptance. I wasn't perfect, far from it, but I was learning to be okay with that. I was learning to be patient with myself, to embrace the journey instead of fixating on the destination. I realized that the person I had been waiting for all along wasn't someone else, it was me. I was the one who needed to show up for myself, to believe in my own worth, to love myself despite my flaws. Life didn't become magically easy or endlessly joyful, but it became richer, more textured. I began to see myself not as someone waiting to be rescued, but as someone capable of creating her own happiness. And that realization, above all else, felt like a victory. As time continued to pass, I started to feel a sense of empowerment that had been missing for so long. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, it was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. I no longer felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts. Instead, I was learning to navigate them, to sit with my feelings without letting them consume me. I began setting small goals for myself, not because I was chasing perfection, but because I wanted to see what I was capable of. Some were simple, like cooking a new recipe or completing a puzzle. Others pushed me further out of my comfort zone, like signing up for a local hiking group or attending a networking event for young professionals. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, became a building block in the foundation of my self-confidence. In the process, I also started to redefine what I wanted from my relationships, both romantic and otherwise. I had spent so much time craving a partner, someone to validate my worth, that I had neglected to truly think about what kind of connection I wanted. It wasn't enough to simply not be alone. I wanted something deeper, something that aligned with the person I was becoming. That clarity allowed me to approach relationships with more intention, whether they were friendships or potential romances. The unexpected part of this journey was the joy I found in solitude. I never thought I would get to a point where I could genuinely enjoy my own company, but I did. I found comfort in the silence of a Sunday morning, the freedom to plan my day exactly how I wanted, and the satisfaction of doing things just for myself. I started traveling alone, first on small day trips and later on weekend getaways. Each experience felt like a celebration of my independence, a reminder that I didn't need someone else to make my life meaningful. Of course, there were moments when old insecurities resurfaced. I'd see a happy couple on the street and feel a pang of longing, or scroll through social media and be bombarded by engagement announcements and wedding photos. But instead of spiraling into despair, I learned to acknowledge those feelings without letting them control me. I reminded myself that everyone's journey is different, and mine was unfolding in its own time, in its own way. One of the most transformative aspects of this period was how I started to view love. I realized that love wasn't just about romantic relationships, it was everywhere, in so many forms. It was in the laughter I shared with friends over a cup of coffee, in the warm embrace of my parents when I visited home, in the pride I felt when I achieved something I'd worked hard for. Recognizing and appreciating these moments of love helped me feel less empty, less alone. Eventually, I found myself in a place I never thought I'd reach: peace. I stopped measuring my life by what I lacked and started celebrating what I had. The longing for a partner was still there, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. It was just one part of a much larger, richer tapestry. I know my journey isn't over. There will always be challenges, moments of doubt, and days when the old feelings resurface. But now, I feel equipped to face them. I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for, that I can find joy and fulfillment even in the absence of a romantic partner. And most importantly, I've learned to love myself in a way I never thought possible. Looking back, I'm proud of how far I've come. I'm proud of the person I'm becoming: someone who knows her worth, who embraces her flaws, and who isn't afraid to live a full, vibrant life on her own terms. And while the future is still uncertain, I'm finally okay with that, because for the first time in a long time, I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving.